And that's when I knew I would not be a professional tobogganist. All right. Good night. Sweet dreams. I'll see you in the morning. Okay? Okay? Dream well. Sleep well, even. Nighty night. Farewell. Okay? Okay. All right, James, your kids are in bed. Well, I say kids. Your reserve list cards are in bed. Well, I say bed. The reserve list cards are in the fluffy binders. Well, on. James? James, aren't you mad at me for being weird? Wow, I finally broke him. What am I going to do now?
Walt.
Oh, finally.
Command 0 requires a new entry.
Fine. Yeah. Sounds good.
Initiates teleportation sequence.
Yes, okay, let's go. Oh, my word. Travel across time and space and still take 20 seconds to say 4 words. Wait. The children. I didn't sing them a lullaby. Kids, listen closely. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. I'm your host, Walt, and I'm all alone. There's no one here beside me. Yep. A little Shrek for you all on this morning. We know what's going on here. I've been abducted on my own, which means I have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Walt. Alongside James, you have advocated for structured Rule Zero conversations to ensure balanced games of Commander. We require a new entry into our database. Provide Command 0 for your deck helmed by the Night Witch, Baba Lysaga.
Okay, so this has happened before. The Space Commanders want to understand Rule Zero better, and they want to learn that through the lens of one of my Commander decks. So I'm going to give the best Rule Zero description I possibly can. Of course, this is not going to be a one-to-one representation of how I would conduct my own Rule Zero conversations, because I don't want to bore the people I play with a 20-minute monologue about what my deck does and doesn't do. But we've got a bit of time. I have been abducted after all, and the Space Commanders want to know everything. So we're going to give a fully fleshed out Rule Zero description of this deck. But one thing at a time, just a very quick refresher for those of you who may not know on what Rule Zero is. Rule Zero is otherwise known as the pre-game discussion. So we use the term at the Get Commanded podcast the way that most of the player base does, which is that Rule Zero is this catch-all term for everything that you talk about before the game commences. According to the Commander Rules Committee, RIP, this is also where we discuss whether illegal cards will be allowed, whether proxy cards are okay, how mulligans will be resolved, whether we're going to bend the games of Commander altogether. But for most players, Rule Zero is this crucial discussion of what power level people are looking for in the game that's about to occur. That's the way that we talk about Rule Zero. When we say Rule Zero, this is what we're talking about. So, at Get Commanded, we don't like the 1 to 10 power level scale that a lot of people use. It's extremely subjective and open to interpretation. So we highly recommend using our template, which is what we'll be basing this episode off. We'll be answering these next 3 questions. Question 1, how does your deck win? Question 2, how consistently does it win? And question 3, how does your deck stop its opponents from winning? When we do this Rule Zero conversation in person, we also have a bonus 4th question here, which is how much experience do you have with playing the Commander format or just playing Magic in general? This is really great when you're playing with people who you don't know at all, just to gauge roughly where they're coming at the format from. Anyway, we're going to do these 3 questions. The first 3 that I said there. How does the deck win? How consistently does it win? How does it stop its opponents from winning? But before that, a little context for the particular deck that the Space Commanders have asked me to talk about today. So, in a rare thing for me, I just built this Baba Lysaga deck because I thought that Baba Lysaga looked like fun. Usually, I'm just searching for a deck that fills a gap in my collection. You know, I look around and go, I don't have any enchantment decks. I better build an enchantment deck. Or I disassemble a deck and then construct something similar, like a spiritual successor. I've done that actually with enchantments before. But in this case, Baba Lysaga just looked like an interesting deck building challenge. I particularly enjoyed seeing Joey Schultz's deck that he played on a budget episode of Tolarian Community College's Shuffle Up and Play. Highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already before. Joey has, I think, an actual full power Baba Lysaga deck, but he built a budget deck for this particular video, and it played really great, so I really wanted to check it out. So, I will read you Baba Lysaga. Okay, so Baba Lysaga Night Witch is a legendary creature, human warlock. She's a 3/3 that she has the ability tap, sacrifice up to 3 permanents. If there were 3 or more card types among the sacrificed permanents, each opponent loses 3 life, you gain 3 life, and you draw 3 cards. So this is a deck that wants to sacrifice 3 different card types pretty much every turn. We'll be gaining life, which is okay, draining our opponents, which is pretty good, and drawing 3 cards, which is really what we're searching for here. It's fantastic to draw 3 cards pretty much every turn. Importantly, you may have noticed when we were reading that ability, you don't actually need to sacrifice 3 permanents to trigger Baba Lysaga's, to use Baba Lysaga's ability. You just need to have 3 card types represented. So, as an example, we could sacrifice Solemn Simulacrum, which is an artifact creature, and as long as we also sacrifice an enchantment or a land or a planeswalker or a battle as they now exist, we will successfully use Baba's ability, and we will drain the table for 3, gain 3 life, draw 3 cards. So the key to this deck is low to the ground permanents with low mana value that either have or can produce multiple card types. A good example of this, Liquimetal Torque is an absolute powerhouse in this deck and a lot of others as well. It's a 2-mana artifact, taps for colorless mana, also taps, and target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So this would allow us to take a creature that isn't an artifact, tap Liquimetal Torque, make it an artifact, and now we only have to sacrifice that and 1 other card type, and we will be drawing 3 cards. We can also do it with cards like Servo Schematic. This is a 2 generic artifact that says when it enters or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So yes, artifact creatures are really helpful. Enchantment creatures, even those artifact lands, they've done a cycle of these. Darksteel Citadel is a good example of that. Even creature lands like, what's the cottage? I forget the name of it. This was in Wilds of Eldraine. Can turn into a creature, it attacks, exiles a card from a graveyard, makes a food token. Very played in Standard at the moment, as I discovered in the World Championship. But that's a good example of something where if we turn that into a creature and sacrifice it, it's a creature and a land. I hope you're getting the gist here. We want multiple card types in the stuff we're sacrificing. That's how the deck works. In terms of price, I feel it's worth mentioning because I am the budget boy. My version of this deck actually comes in at only $125. For some of you, that may still sound like a large number, which is totally fine. But honestly, the context of my decks, and I think in building on a budget these days, I think that's pretty good. You could pretty easily copy my list, cut a few of the pricier lands in there. I think the cottage is a good example of that, actually. And also some of the fancy frame versions. Like I think I've got a Reclamation Sage that's like the fancy borderless version of it. You could cut most of those fancy cards and you could end up under $100, I reckon. And the deck would work fine. And I see actually why Joey, when he played on Shuffle Up and Play, used this as his budget deck, because it's absolutely a deck that can be played on a budget. And this $125 deck, it plays a lot better than you would expect an $125 deck to play in these colors. We should get, though, to our questions that we outlined at the top. So the first question we need to answer is, how does this deck win? Well, mostly this is an aristocrats deck. We're playing classics like Zulaport Cutthroat, Vran, Poison Tip Archers, these effects that say when a creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, when it dies, drain someone for 1, you gain a life, stuff like that. But we're also playing some artifact-specific drain effects because we have so many ways to sacrifice artifacts. So Marionette Apprentice is a recent addition and a good example of this. For 1 and a black, you get a 1/2 with Fabricate 1. So this means when this creature enters, you can either put a +1 counter on it or create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. And it reads, whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So we don't get to gain any life from this, but we do get to drain our opponents. And on a very efficient body, for only 1 and a black, it'll also come in and pretty much always we'll just be choosing the mode that lets us make that servo artifact token. So it gives us something to sacrifice as well, which is very handy. And of course, no apprentice would be the same without its master. So we're also playing Marionette Master, a much older card. For 4 black, this has Fabricate 3. It's a 1/3. When this creature enters the battlefield, same thing. You can put 3 counters on it or create 3 servos. And whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So obviously we can have this come in and make 3 servos, but more of the time we're playing this towards the end of the game, putting those 3 counters on it, and then that means that when our artifacts get sacrificed, we drain someone for 4 for every artifact that hits the bin. This has absolutely ended some games for me. At the top of our curve, we also have 3 more pretty powerful win conditions. We've got Titania, Protector of Argoth. This is the 3 green 5/3, enters the battlefield and returns a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. But more importantly, whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you create a 5/3 green elemental creature token. So this lets us get value when we inevitably end up sacrificing our lands to Baba's ability. Obviously, she can bring 1 back, but more importantly, we're making 5/3s every time that we're doing that. Psychosis Crawler is probably the real bomb at the top of the curve here. Unsurprising in a deck that draws cards so consistently. Psychosis Crawler for 5 generic, you get a horror. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your hand. Ooh, Phyrexian Horror. I have an old version of this card. Phyrexian Horror, power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand, and whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. This effectively doubles Baba Lysaga's ability. Now when we draw 3 cards, everyone's losing 6 at least. It's going to be an absolute staple in ending the game. Also, we have a Living Death in this deck. If the game goes really long and we need a way to close it out, Living Death is the one that just basically swaps everyone's graveyards with their battlefields. Okay, second question is, how is the deck consistent? The usual things we highlight here are tutors and card draw. There are no tutors in this deck whatsoever. There's also only about 6 cards that actually have the ability to draw me cards in this deck, which is a lot lower than we usually recommend, which is these days closer to 15. That said, Baba Lysaga draws cards. It's her ability. It's what we built the whole deck around. Mostly this deck is consistent by containing lots of ways to keep Baba protected as we go about our game plan. Fungal Fortitude has been a real favorite for me lately. This is the enchantment from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. For 1 and a black, it's an enchantment aura with flash, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+0. And when enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. Very cute things we can do here, namely because you can sacrifice Baba Lysaga to her own ability and sacrifice Fungal Fortitude, and because they're put into the graveyard at the same time, Fungal Fortitude will still return Baba Lysaga to the battlefield. Very cute little synergy, and also just a way to, at flash speed, make it so that Baba doesn't die to a board wipe, that kind of thing. Kaya's Ghostform is another card that works very similarly and is great for similar reasons. Our curve is also extremely low with an average mana value of only 2.66. Because we draw cards so effectively, it's often important to empty our hand as fast as possible before we refill it again. So some of those pairments I highlighted before, Psychosis Crawler, Living Death, Titania, Marionette Master. The only other permanent with a mana value over 4 is Eudora Grave Gardener. So that means there's only, 5 cards with a mana value over 4 in the entire deck. Every other card in the deck is mana value 4 or less. So we can empty our hand extremely effectively in this deck. Another deck that'll make the whole deck work a lot better, another card that'll make the whole deck work a lot better is Instill Energy. Oh no, I'm reading a very old version of this card. It certainly doesn't say this anymore. For a green, you get an aura, enchant creature aura. The creature can attack as though it had haste, but importantly, you can pay 0 and only during your turn, you untap the creature Instill Energy enchants. You can use this ability only once each turn. Very old card, templated very strangely. They don't bring cards like this anymore. But this lets us activate Baba twice in a single turn, obviously, as long as it's our turn. And you can also be really cute, and you can activate Instill Energy for 0 mana and maintain priority and use Baba Lysaga to sacrifice Instill Energy in response to its own ability. What will happen is you'll resolve a Baba Lysaga ability, and then underneath that on the stack will be the Instill Energy, and you'll untap Baba Lysaga to go and do it again. So you can actually sacrifice Instill Energy and still get that untap effect. Very cute little synergy in the deck. I really enjoy in this deck how easy it is to have a functional game. Only 2 or 3 lands can allow you to cast pretty much every spell in the deck. As I said, most of them are 4 mana or less. And Baba's ability will let us find even more to do every single turn because we're digging 3 cards deep almost every turn of the game. This deck is probably the most consistent deck I have ever built, which is wild considering it contains no tutors and only 6 pieces of card draw. Okay, third and last question. How does my deck stop my opponents from winning? Well, we're on a pretty stock standard removal package with cards like Chime of Night. Wait, what the hell is Chime of Night? Chime of Night is an aura that says, chance a creature for 1 and a black. It says, when Chime of Night is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, destroy target non-black creature. It's removal, right? Non-black creature. Isn't that Terra? The card Terra? Oh, that's also non-artifact creature, I think. It's basically Terra, but on an enchantment that we can sacrifice. So yes, jokes aside, enchantments are going to be great removal pieces in our deck because when we don't need them later, we can sacrifice them. Importantly, cards like Lignify and Kenrith's Transformation, we can enchant our opponent's creatures with these. And I know that most of us represent this by putting the aura like on the creature, so, you know, on your opponent's board, but you actually still control that aura. So you can sacrifice Lignify or Kenrith's Transformation or Chime of Night if it was on someone else's creature to Baba Lysaga's ability, even though it's on a creature you don't control. We also have 1 Edict in this deck, which is Rise of the Witch King. I'm really hot on this card, as you'd know if you follow my Thrifty Thursdays. 2 black, green. It's a sorcery that says each player sacrifices a creature. If you sacrificed a creature this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Any permanent card in our graveyard will come back this way as long as we sacrifice something. This deck is very, very high on permanents because we have lots of enchantments, lots of artifacts, lots of creatures, and we're also sacrificing lands. So the absolute floor of this card is just ramping by 1 and having everyone sack something. Not too bad, honestly. In terms of board wipes, we do play 2 of them. One is the aforementioned Living Death, but we're also playing Terra Tide, which has actually impressed me lately. This is the sorcery for 2 black, again from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, clearly something that's on top of my mind. It has Fathomless Descent. All creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So again, we're very good at filling our graveyard with permanents because most of our deck contains permanents and we're sacrificing them every turn. I've been really impressed with Terra Tide. I think it's an underrated board wipe that in certain decks can wipe the board pretty much every time. Look, there are no commanders like Baba Lysaga. I reveled in the deck building challenge of cramming card types everywhere they don't belong, and I've been continually impressed by the similar challenge of piloting this monstrosity. It's aristocrats and life gain and tokens and enchantments, but most of all, it's trying to work out how it all fits together and results in a win. And hey, if you can't work it out, just draw some more cards. So, Space Commanders, command received. to you listeners. Do you feel commanded? What do you think of my Baba Lysaga deck, which of course will be linked in the show notes of this episode if you want to check it out on Moxfield? You can get in touch with us on any social media platform, really, at Get Commanded. You can talk to us live in the chat of our Twitch channel as well, twitch.tv/getcommanded. And if you can't tune in on Monday nights when we stream Commander gameplay, you can always watch that content on demand on our YouTube channel. Don't forget as well to check out our Patreon page, which is linked in the show notes. It's the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast directly. We'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, Dylan Norg, Bertie, Crazy Logic, Benjamin, and Henry Solis. And an extra special shout out to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best! And thanks again to Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring this podcast. They create really fantastic deck boxes, sleeves, binders, basically any gaming accessory that you would ever want. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded to receive a 10% discount on your purchase, and you'll be supporting the Get Commanded podcast at the same time as you get those wonderful gaming accessories. So that's palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded. Now, as is customary at the end of the episode, we planeswalk, but I'm going to be planeswalking back to Earth, I think. Okay, back in my house. Still Jamesless, it looks like, but James will be back next week for some more fun. So we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders. Goodbye, Commander players.